Just now, the Riverbank search for Lilly and Jack has taken a massive turn. Two huge clues have reportedly surfaced, and investigators are urgently trying to verify what they mean, from a disturbed patch of riverbank soil to a possible fabric match linked to the children. Tensions just spiked, because these could be the first real signs in months. And with new rumors surfacing about a man allegedly blocking the road to that exact search site, this case is suddenly more intense than ever. Stay here, because what was found today might completely shift the direction of the investigation. Before we break down the two huge clues just discovered, here's the fastest, most important recap of the case, expanded and detailed so you're fully caught up. Lilly Sullivan, just 6 years old, and her little brother Jack, only 4, disappeared from their rural home in Lansdowne, Pictou County. It was a kind of community where people rarely lock their doors, where neighbors know every passing car, and where children playing outside is part of everyday life. But on that night, something went terribly wrong. When the frantic call went out, police arrived expecting to find signs that the children had wandered off. Footprints, impressions in the grass, a trail toward the woods. Instead, they found nothing. And that nothing would quickly become the most haunting part of the entire investigation. What followed was one of the largest search operations the region had ever seen. Drones swept the treetops. Trained search and rescue dogs worked in tight grids. Boats and divers searched ponds, streams, and culverts. Ground teams walked for hours through thick brush, over rocky terrain and across open farmland. But despite all these resources, not a single piece of physical evidence turned up. No discarded clothing, no dropped toy, no broken branches or drag marks, not even a scent trail for the dogs to follow. Something experts found deeply unusual, especially considering the children's ages. Early on, the RCMP publicly suggested that Lilly and Jack had likely wandered off on their own, possibly becoming lost in the surrounding wilderness. For a time, many accepted that explanation, but as days turned into weeks, then months, that theory began to collapse. Experienced search teams insisted that children who walk into the woods always leave a trace. Yet in this case, there was nothing, absolute silence. Now, months later, with the original clues exhausted and the forest trails long gone cold, volunteer search groups have returned to the field, but this time with a new strategy. They're targeting the riverbanks of the Middle River, a place water specialists say can preserve signs of human movement long after forest evidence disappears. Water has a memory, they say, and if the woods had nothing, the river might still hold an answer waiting to be found. And right as volunteers prepared to comb a newly flagged section of the river, a combustible rumor began to ripple through local online groups, a claim that a man named Wayne McKenzie had intentionally blocked a road leading toward the very riverbank search zone volunteers planned to use. The post painted a vivid scene. Truck stuck, volunteers forced a detour, precious early morning daylight lost while people argued or waited. For many readers, the image was infuriating. If true, it suggested obstruction at a moment when every minute could matter. But just as quickly as the post spread, so did a crucial caveat. There is no official confirmation from the RCMP or from major news outlets that this road-blocking incident actually occurred. That detail matters. In a case already saturated with grief and unanswered questions, unverified claims can become their own kind of danger, distracting volunteers, polarizing neighbors, and diverting attention from methodical police work. Yet despite the lack of confirmation, the rumor lit a fuse. Community message boards filled with outrage, demands for names and accountability, and calls for anyone who witnessed the incident to come forward. The timing of the allegation, appearing the same day that two major investigative clues surfaced, only amplified its impact. People naturally connect events that coincide in time, especially when those events involve the same small community and the same search effort. To some, the coincidence feels like hard evidence of cover-up. To others, it looks like a heated case generating wild, opportunistic speculation. Whether the road incident was a misunderstanding, an overblown encounter, or a factual instance of obstruction is still unclear. What is clear, however, is how quickly rumors can reshape the environment around an investigation. They change the questions people ask, who they trust, and how volunteers and neighbors interact with each other and with police. For investigators, rumors like this present problem. They muddy timelines and introduce new, often unreliable, witness accounts that must be checked. For the community, they inflame emotions and risk turning helpful goodwill into suspicion. In a disappearance already defined by silence and missing pieces, the spread of unverified stories only deepens the fog, making the search for truth harder and the need for verified information more urgent than ever. Now, the first massive clue. During the renewed volunteer sweep, searchers reported discovering a freshly disturbed section of soil along the riverbank, a narrow, tucked-away area that had never been part of the original search grid. This spot was off the main trail, shielded by overhanging branches and dense brush, which meant early search teams had likely passed it without realizing there was anything unusual there. But this time, with months of experience and a more targeted search strategy, volunteers immediately recognized that something in the soil pattern didn't fit the natural landscape. This wasn't simple erosion or seasonal shifting. According to volunteers who first spotted it, the soil looked compressed, almost sculpted by recent weight, the kind left when a person steps, kneels, or braces themselves near the water's edge. The ground was slightly sunken in a defined shape, not scattered or washed out like typical riverbank erosion. Even more telling, the roots of small plants were bent downward, as though something heavy had pressed directly on them. A thin patch of river moss had been peeled away from the earth, exposing fresher, lighter soil beneath it, the kind that only shows when something has been moved recently. None of these signs, individually, would mean much. Wildlife moves through riverbanks all the time. Floodwaters shift debris. Fallen branches can push into the ground. But what alarmed searchers was a combination of all these indicators in one concentrated spot, and the fact that this particular section had supposedly been undisturbed for months. It's important to emphasize, this discovery has not been confirmed to be related to Lilly or Jack. No official statement has been released, and no physical evidence has been linked to the children. However, experts familiar with water-adjacent searches say that riverbanks preserve impressions far longer than forest floors, especially in shaded areas protected from wind and heavy rain. That means this kind of disturbance could represent human activity during a period when no one should have been in the area, whether it points to movement concealment or simply an unrelated passerby. The discovery has added a new layer of urgency and a new location of interest to a case already desperate for answers. And here's the second, and possibly the most important, clue. Near the waterline, searchers discovered a small piece of fabric caught in a cluster of low-hanging branches, partially submerged but still visible enough for volunteers to spot it. At first glance, it looked like debris, the kind of scrap material that often gets carried downstream after storms. But when searchers picked it up and examined it more closely, everything changed. The color pattern on the fabric, a soft, pastel blend of light tones, immediately drew their attention because it resembled the exact palette of the clothing Lilly was reported to be wearing on the day she vanished. This does not mean it is officially hers. The RCMP still needs to run tests, compare fibers, and analyze whether the fabric has any forensic value. No announcement, no confirmation, and no statement verifying ownership has been made. But even without certainty, the possibility alone has electrified the investigation. For months, the case has been weighed down by one devastating fact. There had been no physical trace of Lilly or Jack. No toys, no clothing, no personal items, nothing that could be definitively tied back to the children. This tiny, weather-worn piece of material is the first object in months that even remotely matches anything linked to them. Search experts say the placement of the fabric is what makes the discovery especially compelling. It wasn't lying randomly on the ground. It was entangled, as if carried by water and snagged during higher flow. If it had been near the home or in an easily accessible area, it could be dismissed as coincidence. But finding it deep along the riverbank, in a section previously unsearched, raises significant questions about whether something or someone moved along that route after the children disappeared. If this piece of fabric turns out to be authentic, it would mark the first confirmed physical trace tied to either child since the day they went missing. And for investigators who have spent months working with nothing but digital leads, theories, and dead ends, even the smallest, most fragile piece of evidence could become the thread that finally unravels the truth behind Lilly and Jack's disappearance. Here is a polished, high-retention narration version of that section, expanded, dramatic, and ready for voiceover. But it doesn't end there. Beyond the two major findings, volunteers pointed out several probable clues that investigators simply can't ignore. The first was a set of unusual, drag-like markings carved into the mud. Not the smooth pattern you'd expect from water flow. Not the chaotic grooves left by wildlife. These lines were deliberate, long, shallow streaks that looked as if something heavy had been pulled, inch by inch, across the river's edge. Search experts say it could be an animal, but the path was straight, consistent, and aimed directly